All right, it's recording. Okay, so this is our second group discussion for module 2. So the first question is, how has and hasn't your schooling up to and including Fairfield fulfilled Jefferson's goals? So for this question, I kind of split it up into a societal view first with primary, secondary, and university education. So I felt that through the text, Jefferson was almost saying that with like primary education, it was meant to instill basic like reading, writing, arithmetic skills in children that would enable them to participate in like civic life and like exercise their rights as citizens. So it was seen as a way to like promote social mobility in children. So I feel like today primary education is, I feel like it's largely fulfilled his goals, and especially with public schools for the most part provide like free education to children and like regardless of their social background. But I also feel like it has lacked to address issues of like quality and equity, because I feel like a lot of public schools in poorer areas and neighborhoods are often like underfunded and understaffed, which lead to like inferior educational outcomes for students. So for secondary education, I feel like it has made like similar strides in creating a more like merit-based society, which is, for me, this made me think of high school and like the introduction of standardized testing and like college entrance exams and all of that. So it's helped to almost like level the playing field for students across the country, but it also has been criticized for being too focused, I feel like, on like, or at least in high school especially, like skills of memorization and test taking skills rather than like fostering more of a critical thinking and creativity. And then for university education, um I feel like it's been pretty successful for the most part in providing greater access to higher education for like a very wide range of students. But it also has the downfall to it where I feel like tuition has had like rising costs, and I feel like college, that I don't find this a bad thing myself, but I feel like it focuses more on job readiness over like intellectual curiosity. But yeah, that was my take on it. So did you want to add anything?
Yeah, so mine I kind of focused on like some of Jefferson's like main goals they wanted to like what he wanted to fulfill like for education in this country. And I said like around minute 3 and 4 they talked about like rights and freedoms that must be taught in schools. And like I believe personally that that was definitely filled at like all levels of school. And this also kind of ties into later around minute 6 where they talk about making history a mandatory topic that's always taught, and like whether it's like the wars that our country endured and like the sacrifices our people made, and like even like important events such as the Emancipation Proclamation to end slavery. Like all of these ideas for me were are all areas that are covered at all levels. So another area that I wanted to talk about was like the educational pyramid. Like obviously for us too, we've obviously gone through like fundamental, primary, and all levels of education up until university. So that's definitely Phil Jefferson's goals for me personally. But I can definitely agree with her that like some of the areas of American history have kind of been skewed to more favor like job readiness. But as for like have not lived up to possibilities, this was talked about around minute 24. You could also say like the equal merit to hold higher positions in this country, I would argue, is strongly still based on like status you've grown up into rather than like equal merit like Jefferson envisioned. And you could also kind of argue with adding to the idea like ancestral worship is like something in this country that happens to a degree with many candidates getting into higher like positions of power based on their parents' accomplishments rather than their own. Like for example, at least I said like if you were born and ended up being an ancestor of a Kennedy, you immediately have an advantage over most candidates in politics. which I don't think is fair and like not really what he envisioned for that. So that's what I had to say about the first question.
Yeah, I agree with that too, because I feel like it like can tie in with like if you compare two people or if you say like the ancestor of a Kennedy, it's like they I'm not saying that they do, but like if there is an ancestor of not even a Kennedy, but someone else that has sat like higher up, it's like they could do nothing and then someone else who goes through all the schooling and everything to get like to the same point, like they want the same job and everything, like even though they've done more to get where they are, it's like just because of their status they might not get it pretty much. But yeah, I agree with that. So for the second question, it was how do the Enlightenment inspired penal institutions described by M. Foucault compared to your views on what prison should accomplish? So for this question, I just kind of discussed how, like, little summary at first of how Foucault was comparing, like, or focusing on the shift between, like, public torture and execution compared to modern day prison systems, and how I feel like he argued that the Enlightenment inspired, like, institutions that arose during this time were not necessarily intended to punish criminals, but rather to produce, like, disciplined and obedient individuals who would comply with the rules and, like, get ready or, like, go and like I don't know how to word it, like kind of like get back into like the social norms of society almost. But yeah, I just feel like it was rather to like produce disciplined individuals, and he describes how these institutions were designed to like create a system of constant like surveillance and control where inmates were subjected to very like strict routines and discipline to shape their behavior and just like their overall goal to produce obedient people. And I feel like with today's views on what prison should accomplish, it's evolved a good amount, but also I feel like some of the concepts are still the same. I feel like the like punishment remains a key aspect for like of incarceration, especially for those who committed crimes such as like murder or stuff that's very like much more punishable than something like you walk into like a grocery store and steal something like a bag of chips. Like that's obviously something very different. But I feel like there is that growing like recognition that prison should also focus on like rehabilitation and education and preparing individuals for like a successful re-entry into society, where I feel like in contrast with the Enlightenment institutions, like modern prisons provide more programs and services to help inmates address like underlying issues. Like I feel like addiction and mental health problems and job training are very important aspects to be teaching individuals who are like in prison or incarcerated. So I feel like the whole strict routines could be somewhat helpful, but at the same time, like a lot of problems that arise might have to do with individuals having these like illnesses and issues that they can't really like control that they would need help with. So I feel like us having those like programs of rehabilitation and education and like helping them find jobs and stuff to enter back into society is really important. So yeah, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. That's like mostly what I talked about. I said like having them have a strict business or working schedule is like good, but I don't think like basic education for 2 hours is like not enough. And I thought like to compare to like my ideal, what an ideal prison is, like I'm also with like the rehabilitation and reintegration. So like I thought that like some of what the new prisons are doing now, like having them learn new trades that they could use in the real world to get jobs once they're out, like rather than just long working hours. I think that would like differ. That's in terms to the voucher in France, like the first one from 123 to 126. And then as for the last part with his ideal system, the Matre model, I like the general idea of like having some discipline under the inmates, but I don't think like constant supervision and the idea of like punishing for anything. Like even like I think an example was like unwanted words. Like I'm guessing he just meant like swearing is due for punishment in this. And I'm like, I don't know. I feel like you don't get punished for like swearing in like today's society, but like you get punished for like the big things, so like crimes. And I don't think that should be allowed in prison, obviously, but like having like the constant supervision and like almost like the ticky-tacky rules, I didn't really like agree with. And I don't think like I didn't like that part of his model. So that's my answer.
No, I agree with that. Um, let's see. So the third question is, how do the Enlightenment inspired institutions described by Foucault relate to your schooling up to and including Fairfield? So for this one, I feel like I didn't have too many similarities, but the only thing I felt that I experienced through my schooling was the concept of like the strict routines. So he was explaining in the text how they had the strict routines of like in the winter times you wake up at this hour, and then from there you like get ready, and then you get your ration of bread, and then you do schooling for a certain amount of time. So it's very strict, like little hour, 2 hour time slots where you have stuff, which made me think back. Obviously, it can go like with now with our schedule, but it's also like we make our own schedules based off of like our day and everything. And it's like we can go and like eat whenever we want or like go do whatever. Whereas like high school and like elementary, primary school, it's like you have a very set schedule of like you have class until this time and you always eat lunch at the same time. And like primary school, it's like you have recess, so it's like that. So I've related it in that way where it's like I feel like we had those strict schedules, or at least for me, where you had like the time slots where you had to get everything done. And then the other thing I related to, I felt like, was just like the idea of control, or like someone like in your schools you have, I guess we have it here too, but in high school it's like you have your principal and like school resource officers and people where if like you go to, if you get detention and stuff like that, where it's like the same concepts of punishment, where it's like there's someone in control like watching almost. But yeah, those were like the things I related to most with my schooling. So do you want to add anything?
Yeah, no, I liked your take on like the almost like hierarchy in prisons. That's definitely something that's similar, and you came up with like different stuff from mine. So like I came up more so to like relate to like my answer to the last question, which is kind of funny because I kind of saw that like we were put under a certain discipline where we were punished for like every little thing that we do wrong, at least when it comes up to everything until Fairfield. Like you were punished for swearing or like getting out of line to or like yeah, basically like those things. But even going on to like another point that I brought up, like you were being like constantly supervised. So I don't think the Matre model he describes relates to the way we were brought up in school, or like I don't know if it does, but like I guess I don't like agree with that model for like at least like prisoners.
Yeah, no, I agree. Okay. And then the last one. So question 4 was relate text 3 to text 1 or 2. So I related text 3 to the Foucault reading. And for this one, I just mainly talked about how I felt like they both were about very different concepts, obviously, because text 3 was about like the brain chips and like all of that, and then the Foucault one was obviously about like prison and punishment. So they were about two very different concepts, but I feel like they both related in like their techniques used to like regulate and control human behavior almost, because I feel like they both like obviously in text 3 it was talking about like different diseases and like such as like Parkinson's and Lou Gehrig's, where you can get this brain chip that could help with diseases like that, or like I think it also mentioned like obesity and addiction as well, so it could help in those aspects. And then in the Foucault reading it discussed like obviously, as we already said, just like prisons and like how routines happen there and like things that would help, not necessarily help, but like their strict routines and how they go about these routines with their prisoners and stuff like that. So I feel like they both related in that aspect of like individuals and their like behaviors, I guess. I don't know. Did you want to add anything?
Yeah, no, like one way, like I definitely I definitely agree with you that they weren't like entirely like similar in a lot of ways, but I decided to like relate mine as like almost a almost like relating to solve some of the problems that were mentioned in text two specifically. So like multiple different, I think it was the 123 one and then the I forgot the second part, like the 193 to 196, where he talks about Matre's idea, but they both talk about the idea of like solitary confinement. And I thought that like this new technology could kind of like in the specifically the one that regulates like the loss of self-control, like I think that this could be used for some of those patients or like some of those prisoners that have like underlying like mental health disorders that like either they went into prison with or they've grown into like having in prison, and like that leads to like people becoming in solitary confinement because they obviously like can't control themselves. And I thought that that technology in particular could help the prison system in that way, because like if you could have this new technology that could be implemented into these people so that they could like not be in such an inhumane place like solitary confinement, I think that would help the prisoners better, like overall in like their rehabilitation process. So
Yeah.
that was like my take on how it related.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Because I feel like both, I think the author was Velasquez Manoff, I want to say. I feel like him and Foucault, they're both like very concerned with the ways in which human behavior is like regulated and controlled by these like societal norms. But I feel like Manoff focuses on the role of like imagination and daydreaming, while Foucault examines like the role of institutions. But they both recognize that the methods used to regulate human behavior can have like obviously their benefits, but I feel like they also saw like some unintended consequences too. Like I feel like in I think text 3 he almost discusses like the suppression of like your imagination and how like the suppression of your daydreaming can lead to like the loss of your creativity and innovation, which I think he discussed with like individuals who have Parkinson's and stuff because they like this brain chip would help them obviously. And then like the Foucault one argues like the disciplinary practices used and how they can produce like obedient subjects, but they both like can lead to overall like changes in individuals, whether it be for like the better or for the worse, pretty much. But yeah. And then for the last question, it was what's your personal take on text three? Might it make for a better society? So I feel like after reading the 5 pages, I think it was, of the text, I found the topic of like the brain implants very fascinating, but I was also somewhat, I want to say like unsettling because I feel like on one hand it has like the potential benefits of brain implants, which are very like fascinating, obviously, and they could enable people with like neurological conditions like Parkinson's or epilepsy. I think it was also Lou Gehrig's to live more normal lives, which they could help like individuals with also with mental health disorders such as like depression or anxiety to better regulate like their moods and emotions and enhance human cognition and intelligence. And I think it also mentioned like the concepts of like addiction, whether it be like drugs or like obesity with like food, where it was also helpful with that. But I feel like there also are like the ethical implications of brain implants are they're very like complex, and I feel like it's very difficult to navigate. Like if brain implants were to become like very widely available to everyone, I feel like I kept questioning would they create a new like societal divide between those who like would have access to them and who wouldn't have access, but also the potential for abuse with like corporations almost seeking to like control people's thoughts and action. I don't know if I was just overthinking it too, but like that came to mind. I feel like, 'cause at first I was like, oh, it's really fascinating, but there also is those concepts where it's like corporations might take over for like obviously something not great, but then there's also the aspect of like personality changes and how I think I took some quotes from the text. This was from text or page 3, and it was just what happens if people are no longer in their emotions or like sure if their emotions are theirs or the effects of the machines they're connected to. And I think I even had another one. Um I don't know, I'll look for it, but did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, no, I really liked how you mentioned like just the ethical dilemma that that would cause. That's something that I didn't even think about, but like when you just think about how much like inequality is around these days, like it would definitely be like a set of people that will would be able to get it, and then like a set of people that won't be able to get it, which would just create more inequality for like at least like I'm talking about like the more like advanced chips where like it really changes like some of the later ones like the Neuralink and all those. But like I said, like honestly, like in my personal opinion on this, like I think to some point it would be needed for like the ones that I mentioned. Like I think those should be a priority, like to fix like underlying diseases that people have and like some of the neurological things like you said that like could really help a lot of people. But like I just don't know about like the possibility of like mind altering and like all that stuff. Like I don't know. I don't know if I'm ready for that. Like, and if I will be, it'll be like in a while from now. Like I'm not even thinking about it.
Yeah. No, I feel like to answer like the last part of the question, I'm very mixed on if it would make a better society or not. Because like as you said, obviously that would be amazing if people with these like neurological illnesses could have somewhat of a better life. But like at the same time, there's also like that on the other hand of like what would happen. Like I think this is the quote I had, which it comes across as like something good, but I feel like it also had like it was very strange, but it was on page 4 going to page 5. It said Ever the Optimist told me that brain sensing technology could actually help with the digital incursion, and the smart earbud could sense that you're working, for instance, and block advertisements or phone calls. So like what if your computer knew you were focusing? He told me, what if it actually removes like bombardment from your life? So obviously that sounds really helpful because say you're trying to work or do something and you can't focus, and like obviously if for me especially like if I'm doing work and I get some type of advertisement or something that pops up, I'm going to look at it and then whatever. But I feel like that's just so strange to think like a little thing could just all of a sudden just like block everything, like all of a sudden your advertisements, no one calls you, whatever, just from this little like I don't know, I just found it very strange because it's both like beneficial but also like I don't know, I can't tell if that's like a little too much.
Yeah, no, I totally forgot about that part too. Like I think that's when it like threw me off, and then like as well with like the mind altering stuff, and like their argument was like, well, like we use drugs to like purposely like try and alter people's minds because they're not in the best place. And I'm like, well, like if we're like normal, if we're like, regular people that don't need that, then like I don't know if I like want my mind altered. I think that was my overall argument with like why I was like kind of uncertain about it.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. But I think that was it. The last thing was if you have anything you want to add, but I don't know.
I
I
think
found
we covered everything.
very interesting. That's all I really had to add. I like these. I feel like I like these much more than the text from the other modules so far. But they're very like I found them a lot easier to like understand and interpret. And I also liked like the layout of like the questions for the assignment. I feel like I found it much easier to like relate, like understand
Yeah,
them, relating like
there was a
my
little bit more of like an opinion, like
yeah.
a little bit more opinionated, so I like that.
I think that was it.
Yeah.
End it. Oh, let's see. Recording here.